After choosing empowerment over dread, I began searching for meaningful and effective solutions to put into practice in my own life. Progressive Hedonist is a podcast to share the ways we can take on climate change through food and joy. On days when this seems completely impossible, this podcast is a reminder that each of us can make an impact. I'm Dana Cowan. Join me in conversations with thought leaders like Alice Waters, Andrew Zimmern, Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, and more. We can learn together what is possible. You can listen anywhere podcasts can be found and join the conversation on Instagram at progressive_hedonist.
Hey everyone, Greg Benson here, and if you're a regular listener of The Speakeasy, you probably know by now that I've been working to bring 100% pure, actually good-tasting agave nectar to the United States for a minute, but I wanted to give you a bit of an update. I actually got to travel to the farm where these amazing plants have been growing for decades, and it was just a genuinely moving experience. I got to see these agave in their natural habitat and see what it means to Rogelio, the farmer, to be able to care for the descendants of the same agave that his grandfather was growing almost a full century ago. That's why I'm proud to announce Quixote Imports, a new venture that's dedicated to preserving these agave and, yes, still bringing in the same fantastic, earthy, lightly fruity agave nectar that's going to make you wonder why you've been wasting your time with the crap at the grocery store. Plus, our fans here at the Speakeasy can get free shipping at checkout with promo code SPEAKEASY, so don't wait. Head on over to quixoteimports.com and see what agave nectar is actually supposed to taste like, and use promo code SPEAKEASY for free shipping. Salud.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
So you don't charm the devil with your rock and roll load. Knows that country music's gonna save your soul. The devil runs his groove in them rhythm and blues that sound. It's gonna get you sun in the air.
Welcome back to the Speakeasy. I'm Damon Boelte.
I'm Sother Teague.
And I'm Greg Benson. And guys, what's going on in the world of beverages these days?
Oh man. So I actually was on another podcast the other day, and it's called Barfly, and it's put on by a couple guys, Jeff and Kevin, here in Marin County, California, and it was really fun. We talked a lot about cocktail competitions, which is something that we don't talk a lot about on this show very often these days, but it was fun talking about it, the pros and cons, and kind of like some horror stories, and then some real victories, and it was, and I haven't been in a cocktail competition as a participant or competitor in at least a decade, and but I've judged a lot and emceed some, and so we talked about just like kind of the whole world of it, and yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it kind of got me thinking, like, why haven't we talked about cocktail cup? Oh wait, because COVID, I guess. They didn't really exist during that period. So, but yeah, it was kind of fun reminiscing on those times. And I know Sother, you've done some, and Greg, I think you've done some as well. It's just I've judged more than I've participated in by probably tenfold. And there's always kind of a jealousy on the other side. Like if I'm a participant, I'm like, God, I wish I was sitting down tasting everyone's cocktails instead of being up here nervously kind of presenting. And then like whenever I'm sitting there judging, I'm like, I kind of wish I could just get this over with my drink and leave. And so I told this story about like my first cocktail competition, which was my band was playing a show in the Lower East Side in Manhattan, and we were talking about if you draw a number, it's better to go like last or closer to last. You usually have better chances of winning then, and for many reasons. But yeah, I was totally unprepared for this competition. I had no idea what they were about. This must have been 2008 or so, and yeah, I made my drinks nervously. I didn't bring a theme. I didn't bring a bar back with me. It had no costumes, any of this stuff. It was kind of crazy. And Yeah, and Del DeGroff was one of the judges, and so I was
pressure.
like, "Yeah, exactly." So I was like, "They're like, so tell us about your drink." I'm like, "Well, I'm gonna make it really fast because I have a show to play right now. I've got to get to sound check, blah blah blah." And that ended up being my gimmick, and because Del DeGroff, he loves music, he's a musician himself, and so he was like, "Tell me about your band." I was like, "Well,
Right.
it's blah blah blah," and it's like. Anyway, so here's my drink. I gotta go. Just let somebody text me if I win. I don't really care because I gotta go play a rock and roll show now. And everyone else brought like coasters from their bars or matchbooks or some sort of something. And all I had was my band's stickers, which happened to be round, perfect coaster size. So I threw those down as my coasters, slammed the drinks down, and got out of there. And I think I won second place. And then that was how Del DeGroff and I became friends, and it was more about music than cocktails. Just in the same way that Dave Wondrich and I became friends, it was more about old punk rock and stuff. And so I don't know, it's just kind of funny what happens with a cocktail competition. It's not always just the competition or the prize. Or that trip was actually the grand prize was going to New Zealand and doing a bunch of extreme sports, which I have vertigo, so I didn't want to win anyway. Like bungee jumping while shaking a cocktail, no thanks.
Nothing to lose when you're competing for a prize you don't want.
Yeah, I also want to say, just as a point of order, I'm pretty sure the bungee jump shakes the drink for you.
Yeah,
but
well, it would
that's
have
neither
to.
here nor there.
I would
but
be
we don't know
so
because
much.
we're only talking to the second place finisher of the contest. So we have no way
Exactly.
of knowing for sure.
I would be so clinched up with a shaker anyway that the bungee would have to do all the work. I would just, So anyway, but that was fun. Jeff Burkhart's a great local bartender out here. He works at one of my favorite spots called the Buckeye. It's basically my Bay Area equivalent of Keen's Steakhouse on 36th and 6th. Much smaller, and there's only one bar. There's not four or whatever there are in Keen's. But it's a great guy, and he's he writes for the Independent Journal out here, and he's kind of a bar celebrity out here. So he's going to be on our show coming up sometime soon. So be on the lookout for that and for his podcast Barfly with yours truly. So yeah,
I'll check it out.
But enough about that. I think we should get into our guest because there's a lot to talk about here. And I had the fortune around that period. Said that competition was in 2008. I think around 2010, I got to go on a journalist trip to Cognac, and I actually got to have dinner at Maison Ferrand. And that wasn't just Cognac. Wonderful, Ferrand Cognac. We went out to the big barn behind, and we tapped into some barrels of rum. And that was awesome, drinking all this rum while we're at the Maison Ferrand. And it was so cool. And there's a new one that's come out. And I'm actually, I like things that are overproofed anyway, just because you kind of get more of a sense of what the actual spirit is before it gets diluted down to, proof down to drinking proof. And so we're going to talk about this Navy rum that we have in front of us. This is a Planteray. This is the Mister Fogg. I've got a bottle here. What's left of it, because it's again one of my favorite types of rum. So I've got enough to probably get us through this episode. And along with that, we're going to talk about the book that was sent. And this one is Exploring 300 Years of Royal Navy Rum and Its Techniques. And we have in the studio our friend Alexandre Gabriel. And we're going to talk about this book, and we're going to talk about this rum. Thank you for being here. I've got one poured already on the rock, one big rock, because it is overproof. So let's kind of cool it down a little bit. But welcome to the show, and let's talk about that. So, what was the inspiration for this book? I mean, I think it's with so many cocktail books out there these days, it's cool to have one that's on topic, but not necessarily cocktail focused. This is really, it's a historical tome of a specific type of rum, which is Navy rum.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be with you guys. I love it, and thank you. We have the rum here, and the best way to talk about something in our business is to drink it, for sure. And so thank you to have me. It's a real great pleasure because I know your spirit, so it means a lot for me to be here today. Yes, the Navy rum. It's kind of a funny story because I always had that gut feeling that Navy rum was the father or the mother of rum as we know it today. You see,
Mm-hmm.
and because every spirit has kind of a bloodline, and with the father, the mother, the grandfather, I researched a lot of this. And as a master blender, as a distiller, it's always great to know the whys of the past and what something was made and how it was made. My first book was the history of Grand Champagne Cognac. I mean, it's very narrow. Is it a page burner? My wife says it's the first book was best way to fall asleep without medication, so it was not probably very, very, very wide public. I like to say, but very historical. And why I do this is to understand more about the spirits I create. So to your point, Damon, the idea was to say, okay, really, what is Navy rum, right? And if I ask you guys, and some of you may have read the book, and I hopefully not with sleeping, but the question was, what was Navy rum? What do you think when we say this? And I have a confidence to make. Everything I thought I knew about Navy rum was wrong. So just disclaimer, right from the start. Because we think, right, I don't know if you agree, but we think Navy rum, what? It's the strong stuff you are giving to the British sailors so they would drink and work peacefully or not. But, that was part of the fancy treatment you would get. Or was it a quality rum that was part of the pay? And if it was quality rum, how was it made? And was there some basics? And there's a gentleman I really like, Matt Pietrek, because when he research, he goes all the way. And I've known Matt for quite a few years because he would come to my master classes, and he was a guy from Microsoft, like programmer. Don't ask me what he was doing at Microsoft, guys, because I wouldn't really know, even though he explained. And something we don't understand, but very technical. And one day, he came to me. Maybe it was midlife crisis. And at the time, he says, I want to devote my life to research rum now. That I want this to be my new career, and I'm thinking of a book about this. And when sometimes you have a little light bulb that comes, and this little light bulb is like, I never knew what about, Matt, doing a research. My wife and I, we have a little foundation, not a big thing, but we finance the research on preserving the know-how about Navy rum and cognac. Say, we could do this. You'd be in the archives, not a book about books on rum, right? Like going to the archives, going to the Navy documents, going to the British archives, and to dig out everything you can about Navy rum, the old contracts, thousands of pages later. First of all, he said, well, I'm working kind of a book, but yes, I want to do this. I mean, he was super excited. So 4 years later, we are around this table today, and we're talking about a book and a rum later, because I found it so fascinating. When I read these thousands of pages that it dug out and meeting people, we'll talk about this and the reason why we called it Mister Fogg. Then I said, and that's the source of inspiration. Not only it teaches me a lot about the bloodline of rum, but it inspired me the rum that we're drinking today.
Yeah, I mean,
tell us a little bit about the sort of, now that we know what Navy rum isn't, like, kind of take us through your findings. I'd love to kind of hear. I'd love to sort of retrace your steps along this journey and kind of hear a little bit about what you were discovering and what you were debunking from our cultural pool of things we think about this type of spirit, just one step at a time.
Well, now that Damon just finished the bottle, I think we can do this.
so shaking out the last drops.
Exactly. There's some things that we knew and are very specific to the history of rum and to the personal rum. Is Navy rum is a blend of different origins. And by the way, I forgot to tell you, when Matt came back with all this research and his first part of the book, where he's describing everything he found and everybody he met, he was able to found some old guys that have been doing it, that were still alive, that could tell them how they were blending, or a collector. I'll tell you a little later. And these guys would have been forgotten without that research. And Matt, so I was able to all these thousands of pages of archives, including, the lifetime research of a man called Mister Fogg, and we'll talk about that. and to decipher and say, are they pillars? Things that always come. And I was able to identify 7 pillars of Navy Rum. So we'll just brush up with a few, but one is very intuitive. Navy Rum is a blend of different origins. And you know how things are born of necessity. So no, just think today we are sailors. We're on this wooden boat. We're about to cross. We cross the ocean and we arrive in first island, Barbados. In the barrels are pretty empty, right? We probably had some brandy and they're pretty empty and we're thirsty. So we fill up with Barbados rum. And then, we sail to another island, Jamaica, and we top off the barrel. And then another island and so on, and we top off the barrel, right? You see what I'm saying? They were not like, oh, we have different barrels, and tonight we're going to have a blind tasting of Jamaica versus Barbados. That was not quite the mood,
Pinky's out.
Well, it might have been a blind tasting, but for different reasons.
Exactly.
Continue.
It's like an infinity cask.
Yeah, that's a great point, Damon. Exactly. It was the infinity cask. And so that was the origin of blending the different origins. And think about it. In Cognac, I live between Cognac and Barbados. In Cognac, if I happen to blend Armagnac and my Cognac, actually, and I declare it as Cognac, I go to jail for 5 months, So it's not a good proposition, and I'm not sure we're drinking foie gras and so we're eating foie gras and sauternes in French, jail. So nobody's playing games like this. It's very strict. Whereas rum heritage, and it's a part of the, really deep heritage is some of the addition you're thinking about, for example, the 3 stars that are created or, the OFTD have created with the OFTD brothers, And so there are blends of different origins, and we owe that to the Navy. That's one of the pillars. There's others. One, I can tell you, and I could, delve into others, but some also, the one very interesting one was the proof. We thought what proof was Navy Rum, right? We know it's strong stuff, right? And Damon, you touched on that about, foolproof spirits, but we're like, okay, what is proof actually? And so proof, the word proof, imagine, for example, Damon and I, Damon, you're a buyer of rum, and I'm a distiller in Barbados, and we are in the early 1700s, so you're probably wearing like a curly, wig and a little, something, imagine you're back in these years and you're buying rum from me. How are you making sure in 1720 that they didn't put water in this rum? So you have a good palate, Damon, I know you, and you're going to taste it and say, Alexander, I think it's okay, or it's been diluted down too much. But I might argue with you and say, may not. So you would typically pull out some gunpowder, put it in my rum, and lighten it. And if it lights, it means it's 57.14 or higher. It is the proof that the rum is at proof. That's why it's called proof, by the way, right? In America, when we talk about proof, it's the proof of the rum. And so most transactions were done at that proof, which in lights. I know it's 57.14 because I actually use gunpowder. I'm a French redneck, so I got that, available where I'm from. And I, lighten up the rum. And it's true, when it's below, it doesn't light. And when it's above, it lights. We have a picture because Matt wanted to take a picture, and his wife is like, you're not staying in this room while he's doing this. He's crazy. I use a stone table. And so he stayed in, and it lit. And it's not a violent fire, actually. They were not crazy. But think about it. If you guys are the captain of a wooden ship, would you want a liquid that's flammable?
That's flammable.
Probably not.
Especially if you're British and the French are trying to get at you. And usually it's the other way around that happened, unfortunately for the French, that I am. But really, so they would do it 2.5 under proof. So not 57 or 57.14 like most people know, but 54.5. That was 2.5% under proof, just to make sure that it would not burn. And so originally they did it by doing proof and a little bit lower, but then in the early 1800s you had a psych hydrometer and you could measure the proof. So we knew this, and I think quite a few people knew that. But then we discovered that the way they were making rum with the recipes, of course, it's aged and sometimes with barrels that have sweetness in the barrels, and they were using artisanal caramel that has a little residual sugar that created an obscuration. So I'm going to be super geeky, but I did the analysis, and it would actually be at 55.7. And Matt was like, well, that's going to be a hard one to explain. And I said, well, it's a fact. It's, and then he calls me few weeks later, it says, I'm on the document from the British Navy, 1939, and they explained why they thought they were delivering rum to the sailors at 54.5, but actually because of obscuration, they discovered they were delivering rum at 55.7. So as you can see, it's very pointed research, but and I'll tell you another story about another of the pillars that was mind-blowing to a distiller like me. But you see, the little things like this, we wanted to really know the truth and the matter, and we only found it by going through thousands of pages.
Can you repeat all that, actually?
Yeah. No.
I can actually do this, Damon, but I don't think you want
to. Alexander, it's fascinating to me. It's fascinating to me to also think that, as you said, and as Damon pointed out, it kind of became an infinity cask, and it had to do that. But you have, at this point in this analogy that you're using, being on this wooden ship and traveling around with your crew, you have a literal captive audience. They can't get away, and this is what they have to drink. So I assume that after some voyages together, these people would say, well, too much of this and too little of that doesn't equal a quality product that we like to drink every day. And if, again, it's part of our salary, we want it to be delicious. So you had almost like a conglomerate group of people making the decision on what the end result flavor would be, right?
So it's a great point, because quite rapidly on, and remember in the early days, people were brandy, beer, wine, whatever they could find. It's only, so the same way that you, me, and the listeners, we grow into ourselves, we're infant, we don't know what too much you are. As a teenager, fighting your parents and stuff. And then finally you kind of figure it out. I mean, I'm still working at it, but we're getting better at it to know who we are, right? And so that's the same with Navy Rum. So the origins were that, but rapidly the Admiralty said, you know what, we're going to blend it in the UK. So they started using traders and buying a little this, a little that. They were looking and they were trying. And then you have master blenders in the Navy, and you're right, Sother, that was the part of the pay. So quality mattered, cost mattered. The Navy, was careful, but that was part of the pay. And interestingly, you hit it right on the head, because a lot of people think Navy Rum was one recipe that stayed on. No, there was like 3 or 4 recipes every year, but the constant, it was a blend of different origins. The proof, since 1866, we knew that was set, that was 2.5 under proof, which is, the way they were doing it, 55.7. But one thing that blew my mind, I can tell you, is when they were doing in the UK now, remember? They were vatting the rum. And I knew this, you blend into a wooden vat, so it oxygenates. And Damon, you might have seen some of our wooden vats, because Cognac, I'm trained as a master blender, we still do that, is to create a very seamless blend. So you vat. And Damon, remember you mentioned the infinity barrel. This would be an infinity vat in that case, right?
Sure.
And so one day he calls me, Matt, and he says, Alexander, they were vatting the rum. I'm like, yes, that's intuitive. No, they were vatting in open vats, no top. And that sounds mundane, not quite, because your angel share goes from 3% to 15% a year. And you're like, were they crazy, or were they stupid, or what they were trying to do?
Yeah.
Probably evaporate more.
That's a considerable loss, right?
It's a huge loss, exactly. And so open dynamic, we called it, dynamic vatting, because they were also trickling from one vat with gravity to the other. Man, the sailors were lucky, They were, and luckily I have that vat room that's from the 19th century with these vats. I've decided to take the top off. I was crying because these are museum pieces. I mean, these vats are from the 1800s, 19th century. So I'm like, screw it, we're going to do this. Then you need to go to see French customs, because if you evaporate more than 6%, and you need to really make your case ahead, because otherwise you get not only the tax on it, but the fine, because they think that I'm selling it under the code to Greg, Sother, and Damon, and saying, hey, do you want a little extra? So that's why we had to make a case that it was pure research, and they agreed to that. And we tried it, and it's like making a bechamel on your back burner or deglaze, you're kind of like making a reduction of that rum that gives it that oiliness. And, and they did it 6 months to 2 years. And there were several documents, it was not just one instance with some crazy guy, etc. But crazy. And that's one of the 7 pillars. And that was the one that blew my mind. And I couldn't wait until try it. And next time you're in Cognac, I'll show you, because we did the first edition and we have another one on its way, and it's in these open vats where one vat trickles into the other. So it's kind of crazy.
Cool.
That's wild. So like you've done, you've gone through and you've researched how this stuff was made. You've completely unlearned and then relearned how to make Navy rum. Was there anything, I would imagine if it were me, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but if it were me, I feel like at that point I'd be kind of riding high on my own cockiness and being like, well, as the world's leading expert on making Navy rum, I'm sure that putting some of this in a bottle myself will be easy. I would love to kind of hear how that process was for you, and if there's anything that actually, knowing what you knew in the making of it, really came as a bit of a surprise.
Well, a huge surprise, like I told you, open vat. I mean, I'm trained as a master blender. That's 20 years, right? We never, I've worked the barrels from every size, every type of wood. I'm writing a book about this now. And that was a mind blower for me, and the proof, I knew there would be a difference because I know these techniques. They were not using, industrial caramel. That doesn't change the proof. They were using their own stuff made with their very, very special sugar that they had just a little bit. So I knew that would create a distortion in the reading. So I had some instincts about that. But let me tell you, Greg, the more you research and you hear about a guy that's done that for 35 years, the more you feel humble, because you're like, I bet you there's going to be another crazy guy or crazy lady who's going to maybe prove us wrong with one of these points. And that's okay too. We have a lot of documents to back it up. That's the first part of the book. But maybe somebody finds an eighth pillar. For example, something I didn't touch on because it was very intuitive is something Damon touched on. They treated their vats as infinity vats. So in fact, there's a funny story. It's funny because it's not as dramatic as it sounds at first. There was a dog in the room, in the blending room, always around, and one day they don't find the dog, and she was last time found next to the exit next to a vat. I said, man, this dog must be into the vat, right? And it was not part of the recipe, and poor dog, right? And so they drained the vat, but they never did before, because infinity vat, for the listeners, is in order to create some consistency, you never drain fully the vat. So you leave a third or a quarter at the bottom, and you make your new recipe on top. So you create kind of a bloodline, right? That's the infinity
Solera process.
Solera vatting, absolutely. Yeah. Solera vatting or infinity vat, that's well done. That's a synonym. Anyway, they drain that vat, hoping that on a fine, Matt even has the first name of the dog. And they don't find the dog. Hopefully, she went somewhere else. She was not dead into the rum. But they found a lot of bottles with a string attached to the neck. And they wondered why. And so then there's a report that says that the people working in the vat room at that time loved that rum so much. When it was time to leave work, they were next to the door. And if the boss was not too close, they'd have like this little, like they were fishing for rum, this little bottle with strings and little things. And if the guy was not looking, they would fish it back, put it in the thing. And if he was looking, they would drop the string. And so the bottle would stay at the bottom. So they figured it out to say, we didn't find the dog, and the dog's okay, but we found a lot of bottles. So that got some guys in trouble.
Oh, man.
That was the secret recipe, was theft. That was the secret sauce of the infinity vat the entire time.
Yeah, part of the angel share, Greg.
They were impacting the loss. Yeah. Incredible. Listen, Alexandre, I've been out to Maison Ferrand as well. It's lovely out there. And, I walked the vineyard with you, and we plucked some tomatoes off a vine that we're growing in this difficult soil for grapes to grow in. One of the best tomatoes I've ever eaten. And you're from there. You have a history there. You always refer to yourself as a French redneck, growing on the being on the land and growing up on the land. And you love to talk about the things that come from the land. Yeah.
Rougeneck.
Yeah, Rougeneck. Where did your sort of like historical bloodline split off to say, I'm going to make cognac, but I'm also going to make rum? Which seems to me, again, kind of flavor profile wise, I put rum and cognac in the same kind of boat, but they come from such disparate parts of the world. What made you decide to make that leap?
Well, my inspiration, I love to work with other master blenders and master distillers. I've probably worked with 60 or 62 of them in the world. Much like, Damon, you're talking about bartending, a lot of, like doing a guest shift somewhere. So you do similar things, and we like to exchange knowledge, much like the kids change Pokemon cards. Maybe they don't do that anymore. It's gonna date me, my kids did. So, and so, and also, living on a farm. I mean, you guys been there. So when you have your cognac barrels, remember there's 3.5% of the spirit that you contain in a barrel is actually stored in the wood, right?
Mhm.
So when listeners hear like, oh, you guys hear about finishing, what you want to do, you put another spirit in it, so it's gonna suck out that good stuff. Hopefully, it's good from the barrel. So we make, Premier Cru Cognac at Maison Ferrand. So the barrels we sell them. And one day, a friend of mine, in the past now, Thierry Gardet from Barbancourt, Haiti, said, "Why don't you come over?" And that was my first trip, professional trip, not like vacation trip to the Caribbean. And I usually travel. I love to go on vacation when there's a distillery somewhere. My wife makes sure there's no distillery in the 100 kilometer radius. But I always find one. I'm pretty good at this, and she likes it in the end. And so, I go there, and that was my first, maybe 30 years ago, my first technical trip in the Caribbean. And I've been trained in cognac. I always thought, in cognac we know our stuff, but distilling, we have these tiny little stills. It's very, very crafted. And I kid you not, when I saw the way they were fermenting there, the way they were, I was like, wow, actually, I'm going to learn this until there's no tomorrow, And I think knowledge is pleasure. People,
Sure.
the more you know, the more fun it is, the more creative you can get. And so, in cognac, you don't want the bacteria, right? You want the yeast, right? And you're like, yeah, so you clean your equipment, you can keep it there because bacteria is the enemy. Now, in the most sophisticated methods of the Caribbean, you actually cultivate bacteria. You grow bacteria to create certain flavors, the esters. So, it's like you're being told not to do something or your life, and suddenly they said, actually, you have to learn about it because it's good. And I thought that was mind blowing. And there was no tomorrow. Once I did that, I was like, you know what? I want to know everything about this. And so, on to Barbados, the country that invented rum, 1650, and met this incredible distillery that I'm so fortunate to be part of right now, and on, because there is a great sense. To think about rum, you always have to think about wines or cheeses or food. There's a culture in every island in the way it's made. It's not just the terroir, like that would be the land and the weather. It's a lot has to do also with the techniques that are so different, much like cooking, right? The way, and so I found this fascinating, and that's how I started to do a little barrels, and I like to blow the mind of my friends that are master blenders in cognac. I said, taste our blind. What do you think it is? And because we meet at the same restaurant every Wednesday, and they're like, that's not cognac. Well, actually, no, what is it? Well, it's rum. It's like, wow, that's great. What are you doing? And so, and then then the brand was put together in 1999, but it was just an nutrition to the other. And I wanted to really celebrate the stuff that I've learned from the outside looking in, about these different techniques from each island and make them shine. For example, Paraguay, I'm working with Paraguay a lot right now for quite a few years. They use a wood called incienso, and for 3 generations, there's one guy who's making these bats of this local wood. And man, it's when you taste it, it's like your palate, your taste buds are saying, "This is new to me, man." And so at first you're like, "It's kind of strange," and then it's another level of pleasure, and that's what I'm trying to celebrate.
I love it, and your passion is like infectious. Every time I'm around you, every time I'm talking to you, I'm wrapped with everything you have to say, and then the products themselves are high quality and delicious. So we should talk a little bit about Mister Fogg, the liquid, and then we should talk more about Mister Fogg, the man. Right? Tell us a little bit about what's going on in the bottle here that we all have.
Alors, so we try. Remember, we so with Planteray, we never made a Navy Rum. Why? Because again, I didn't feel I knew what it was. So 300 pages later, we think we got a pretty good idea. By the way, I did the same research on Curacao with Damon, who's an incredible American historian. But we never wrote a book because we think, who is going to want to read a book about Curacao? We're not too sure. Navy Rum, it's in. Yeah, I know, Greg, you would, and I'll send you the research. but for Navy Rum, it's an incredible cool story also. And so I applied what I felt was these 7 pillars. So a blend of different origins. So we chose specific origins. Remember, there was each time a different a blend, so they evolved. So Matt was like, you should do an expression of that specific moment of time. And I acted more like, if I were the master blender of the Navy today, what would I do, knowing everything that I know? So that's what I did with the origins. Of course, having it in the right proof, the dynamic aging, we made sure the barrels were shipped full. So the interaction, in the old days, they're shipped in the barrels, which is what we do with Planteray still, from Jamaica, Barbados, Fiji. And so, so these origins were shipped, and then it was not just bourbon barrels, right? Back then we used Madeira and sherry, cognac, and so we use all these pillars to make this rum from what we've learned and be as close as we could. Like for example, the open vatting that we said. I happen to have this vatting room that is from the 1800s, so that was exactly what needed, and it's not next to the Thames, it's next to a little river, but we have a similar humidity level. We went to check it and we said that'd be cool. So we went with all these steps to make Mister Fogg.
Can I stop 1 second and ask you, you said you're shipping in barrel, and that's unusual, right? Nowadays people ship in the plastic tons or whatever, right?
You're absolutely right. In 99.9%, it's either shipped in its bottle, so it's watered down in the country of origin. But in the old days, think again, we are sailors on this ship. You bring back rum, you bring it undiluted, and that's what people like, a lot undiluted spirits anyway. And the water to dilute a spirit should be as pure as possible. So whether it's distilled at the time, water on one end of the Atlantic or the other, be the same. But what they would in the barrel, remember, with the movement, it's called dynamic aging.
Right.
And the effect of dynamic aging has been spotted as the 1700s as like, it's a little smoother, it's a little more extracted. Why is that? And it's easy to understand the abrasion, the liquid that's basically making love to the inside of the barrel for weeks and weeks and weeks. So you got that great interaction between the rum and the wood. So we do that. We do that with Planteray, because we think, first of all, it's a great way to bring back your barrels, to Europe, and then you don't have to throw them away when they're in Barbados. You can, sell them to a friend of yours who's making whiskey or making beer or making etc. So I think it's a beautiful circle, but also, and very importantly, technically, it's a beautiful little thing. Great quality is never one big thing like the marketing guys want you to believe. Right. Great quality is the addition of many, 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 many elements, and that's one of them.
Right. I was wondering, you said that the humidity levels similar to the River Thames. Are you talking about the Ferrand River?
It's not the Charente. It's a little river that gives into the Charente. It's called l'Antenne. And remember, Cognac has got little rivers. They were the highways of the 16 and 1700s. You just had a little barge, put your barrel. You don't put a barrel on the back of a donkey or a horse and a horse carriage. You would just float them through the Charente River. Damon, you're right. And the Charente happens to go all the way at sea when the bigger ship would be waiting for you, and you would load up preciously your barrel. And the Charente River defined Cognac, because that was the way you could ship these barrels.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is cool. I love talking. First of all, I gotta just say before we move on to who Mister Fogg is, or was, or I love. So everyone knows that I love cognac. I love brandy production. I think it's so cool. To me, the distillation is the science, but blending is the soul, right? And so to talk with a master blender like this, it's one of my favorite conversations, and there's just so much that goes into it. And, I always say that the most important ingredient is time. It's time for, in the barrel, but it's also time on the job, because this isn't something that you can go to school for. This is something you learn on the job, right? And you clearly have been doing this very passionately for many, many years, enough to write a 300-year-old book about rum. So yeah, this is just exciting for me. I'm sure Greg and Sother, don't you feel the same way? I mean, this is just cool. I wish we were doing this in person.
Same.
But yeah, but it's cool enough that we get to do this anyway. Spread out all across the globe. So And speaking of spread out across the globe, it's cool to me to look at this bottle, now empty bottle. My glass is halfway full, half full, full, not empty. But Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana, and Jamaica are the places that are listed on the side of this bottle, the infinity bottle, if you will. So let's get to Mister Fogg. Like who's the namesake of this bottle?
You know, when you create a product, you always have, like, what are we going to call it? It's like having a baby, you're going to have, my wife is actually American, so it was even harder to call kids because sometimes I had a good name and she says, no, Alexander, in America, it's the name of a hotel chain. I'm like, well, in French, it sounds good, it's always good. And when you bartender, Damon, like what are you going to call your creation? It's the same as a blender, master blender, remember when we did the overproof rum? So now, overproof is higher than 57.14. And with Dave Wondrich, Beach Bamberry, Jeff Berry, and Martin Kate, Scotty Shooter, and so on. When we Paul McGee, Paul McFadden. So we gathered this team and we're looking for a name and we couldn't, like you got Dave Wondrich just say, oh, the Pirates used to call each other's nasty face. I say Planteray or Plantation at the time, nasty face. I don't think so. And then, like we couldn't and say, what about shit face? Planteray, shit face. I don't know. And they were calling each
I'd
other.
buy it.
And then, we got lucky at a moment, I finalized the blend and Dave stands up, and a very eureka moment, he yells, oh, fuck, that's delicious. And I thought that was such a eureka way of saying, and we called it OFTD, right? And so there's always like how you're going to call your product. And we thought it was kind of cool, maybe because we had too much rum, but we decided that night that was going to be called like this. On the label, it says old-fashioned traditional dark, but that was the re-engineering afterwards. So we could go to customs and more importantly, to TTB approval. But here was like one day, and it was not even solicited. Matt says, I met this incredible guy. He used to be in the Navy when he was drafted, and then he was hired by EDF Man. EDF Man was one of the Crown trader, because at the time they were not distilling. The Crown was not dealing with the distilleries anymore. They were dealing with traders. And EDF Man is actually still a trader, but not for rum anymore. Now they trade in molasses. It's a very storied company. So long story short, he goes to work with EDF Man, and then they close the rum. In 1970, we didn't touch on this. The British Crown, which I think was a bad decision, but they decided, since the equipment became, on ships more and more technological, nuclear bomb or, whatever with the little red button, green button. Maybe if you have half a pint of rum every day into you is maybe they figured, I think again, probably wrong choice, but they figured was not the best thing to continue giving sailors rum. Was half a pint every day of 54.7% alcohol. So he was part of this. And in 1970, there's a Black Tot Day, it's called, because the tot was what they were served. There's no more rum for the British, for the sailors, right? Very sad day. Now you have to have the king go on your boat so you drink rum, or you're given rum, so it's all gone. And then this man went through Black Tot Day, and then they had all these archives, about 100 years of archives. And so they said, clear that office. Now we're training whiskey, with another business. And he asked if he could keep some of these documents. So he kept some of the documents. It came to the fact that he could save some of these documents and started a passion for it, and started collecting all his life artifacts. When he looked on internet, somebody was selling this, and he had all these documents. And he was just doing this himself. At one point, he was, vested into being an ambassador, explaining about Navy Rum, but he was an old man. And Matt says he's very sick. He wants to carry on and give me all his knowledge, and he's got all these contracts and artifacts. And so I said, I tell you what, if and I can speak with him. And then he got super sick, so I spoke with his wife, and we could protect all these documents and make them available for the next crazy guys who want to write. And I said I would actually make a room at the Chateau Bonbonnet next time you come, guys. Mister Fogg, we're working on building this. And then his wife told us he's very, very, very sick. He's at the hospital. He's not going to make it. So I don't know, load of emotion for me and for Matt. And I said, why don't we call it Planteray Mister Fogg? Without him, he's not the whole Rosetta Stone, as Matt likes to say. He's the corner of it for sure. Without him, a lot of things that we know, what you have in this bottle without him wouldn't be exactly like this, for sure. And so I thought, it'd be cool. And so he got to know, by the way, before pass, and his wife and his son, Michael Fogg Jr., agreed to it. Obviously, we wouldn't have done it without them. And we called it Mister Fogg in his honor. Without him, we couldn't have done this. So I thought, or we would have done it, but not some elements that we discovered, thanks to him. Sometimes you have a guy or lady like this. They do all things their life. We all know somebody like that, right? Whether it's about stamps or, about butterflies. And I collect pot stills, for example. So I've been collecting pot stills for 30 years, and I have 30 of them. So it's a barn with a whole bunch of pot stills. It looks like a cemetery of old elephants, but everybody's got their thing, right?
Takes more space for collecting stills than it does for collecting stamps, for sure.
Yeah, I've learned that the hard way, man.
They don't travel well.
Man.
Let's talk then. So Mr. Fogg is this real life human being who collected these things over his lifetime, and you were kind of the benefactor of all this great knowledge and helped you drive how to create this rum and also to put out this book. You and Matt. Let's talk about Matt a little. Matt's I know his name, of course. He's the cocktail wonk. You can find him all over the internet. He's a deep dive researcher of whatever he decides to research on. How did the two of you kind of come together on this project?
Well, Matt, Matt always, I always saw, I do master classes, I either produce rum or cognac or gin, or I'm just back from the Berlin Bar show, like literally right now, on way to Barbados to make rum. And so that's basically my life, right? And so when I did master class, there was always this super geeky guy with the super geeky questions, there's always that guy. And that was Matt. And then, it's very funny because we did a road show about the Navy Rum, and we were together at Rumba, in Seattle. And he said to me, he said, Alexander, I would have never guessed that I'd be here, because we did tasting, with you, talking about something that usually I was part of the people coming. And so I saw this man, and then like I told you, I think earlier, he said one day, I want to dedicate my life to this. I want to stop. I want to sell my house. I want to move to New Orleans with my wife, Carrie. And by the way, she's incredible. She's really the force, and she's keeping us all organized. And otherwise we'd be all over the place, when we write something. And he said, I want to do this for the rest of my life, And it's a big jump, right? You decide you're going to be a writer about the geeky stuff of rum. And like I said, to me, there's a little light bulb, and I said, I got a project for you. And what is Navy Rum? It's like, you don't know what it is. I said, I maybe I know. Frankly, I don't think I do, because I asked the questions, even the proof, nobody agrees. So hence the journey. And, he spent 6 months solid, just going, flipping through pages, documents, meeting people, solid. And then, I always, when you do a book, and it's always good to let it rest, because if you just go to print right away, then you're like, oh shit, actually I was wrong about this, right? It's like you need to let it decant. And also was my excuses because I was not writing my part fast enough. So so I use that as well, I must say. But it was to purpose. So it was really 4 years. It took us 4 years from that moment where we're talking and drinking rum together, when he told me about this life change he wanted to make with his wife, Gary, to the point that we went to print. It was 4 years and a rum later.
So you got to the point where you look at it and you're like, decant, and then you were decan.
Decan. Yeah, nice.
That's a good one.
So he basically did the heavy lifting on the research. I'm understanding, and then you sort of like shaped it into a book that we can all hold and read.
He blended it.
He actually wrote the first part. Yeah, he wrote the first part, which is all the research and the documents and what did he find, like and presenting all this in the first part of the book, and which is actually the thicker part. And for me, looking at all these documents, all these archives, is just researching what he had dug out and found to say, what does it mean? Is there a bloodline? Is there pillars? Remember we talked about, is there something that rum grew, Navy Rum, British Navy, Royal Navy Rum grew into? And we have agreed that in 1866, things is really kind of the birth time, because this is where the Navy says it's going to be every time 2.5 on the proof, and they never wavered. And that was the last, when a painter finishes something, the last stroke that defined it. And I found these 7 pillars, which he covered some. The open vat is one of them. The real proof is one of them. Blending different origins is one of them. Dynamic aging, remember, being on a ship when it's shipped like this. So you don't make it happen overnight. There was a big endeavor to put it together. And, we had that open vat and everybody, and the one trickling into, and then you pump it back up, and it's like a little, little trickle down. So that's called micro-oxygenation. So we're very familiar. And so we knew what they were doing, it's to integrate it fully. And people would have, there's Jacques who does the visits, he has with very special people, and he has this little thing. He went fishing for him, and everybody loved it. So everybody was like, this is great stuff. And because a lot of research we do, we drink it ourselves, and we had enough, we could share it. So we did it, and we called it the sale number 1, because it was really our journey. And that's what you're drinking, is the sale number 1, that 2 years of open vats. Actually, we went all the way. There were 6 months to 2 years, to get it all the way. Exactly. That's why it says sale number 1, and the sale number 2 is in these 2 infinity vats, and it's happening as we speak.
Very cool.
I mean, it's outstanding. Can you talk to us a little bit about the flavor profile of the stuff we're sipping on so we can edify the listener?
It's funny that somebody was telling me this. I'm trying to remember who. I wonder if it's not even Matt. That says, to me, it's like a Christmas pudding to which you put OFTD on it, which is our overproof rum, and you squeeze that, and that's your rum. And so, I thought I kind of liked it, as a creator of this rum, the fact that you got that rumminess that's there, and, at Barbados, at our distillery, West Indies Rum Distillery, we make Planteray, Barbados, rum is a verb. And I love it. We don't say, like when we love something, we're like, this is rumming, like when you, and you know what I'm talking about, right? Like the love handles of rum, the substance, and when it's like, it's thin and there's nothing to hang on. And we said, man, this is not rumming, and so this is rumming, man. And that was very important to us. And, to us, that's a verb. And so you got that and what we mean by rumming is these exotic notes of exotic fruits, these spice notes. So you got a little banana, a little, dried coconuts, and that's the spice notes from the wood. But you got also, dry mango with a touch of pineapple. And then you got, I don't know if you get this, but there's a little pepperiness. There's some spice into it, almost cloves and so on. So that's why I love, we always go tasting notes, in Master Blender, you have your own tasting notes, and tasting notes are so personal. But I love that analogy when he said, all the flavors I get in that Christmas pudding, that's delicious, that's done with these dried fruits, and then you put the rum in it and you squeeze it. I thought that was kind of cool. And I don't know if you guys agree, but because it's been evaporated like this in a crazy way, and your share 15% a year for 2 years in a row. I mean, imagine for us, rum is precious. My people in Cognac don't put money in the bank; they put money in the barrel. We always say, because look, somebody, the grandmother raised me. She went through 5 different currency in her lifetime, right? So you don't believe about money, and money is paper, right? At the time, so people put their money in barrels. And so when you lose 30% in 2 years, imagine you put money in your bank account. And 2 years later, you come back, there's 30% that's gone. And so it makes you think twice. You're like, are you sure, we're doing this? And then when you taste it, like I said, it's like making a nice bechamel, you create that concentration that gives that oiliness, that's probably due to that process. So that's how I would describe it, Sother.
Yeah. I mean, my initial nosing of it a couple of weeks ago when I opened this bottle was honestly, you said Christmas pudding. I said fruitcake, which is the American version of Christmas pudding, right? A lot of dried fruit, a lot of like prune and raisin, and maybe even like cinnamon, and as you mentioned, some spices like clove. The aroma is very attractive, right? Kind of speaks to. It's funny. I always say in America, we relate cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, mace. We relate all those things to winter and Christmas, and they mostly come from islands where it's never cold. Right?
I love it.
It's got this kind of Christmassy vibe, even though all these things come from a place where the sun shines every day of the year, right?
It's funny. I never thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, very, very exotic. And And so, so that's that taste profile. And to tell you the truth, we didn't try to, very often I work differently because I've done this job so many years. And I'm the guy who's never happy because we're not there yet or where I want to go. I created a rum with my team called Cut and Dry, where we extract from coconuts. It took me 4 years, 97 recipes, and I never give up. So sometimes it's miserable because you're there trying and trying. Here we're more like contemplative, to say we're doing things that way and we're going to see what happens, right? The blend of these different origins, I was very familiar, the use of the barrels, but then when you're going to evaporate, you're going to lose some of the esters that are usually part of the aromatics, so for me it's new territory. And let me tell you, I think it's new territory to a lot of people. I met a lot of master blenders. I was trained by wonderful ones, and I never accounted for doing this, and there's a merit to it. And if you ask me, I'd say they were probably trying to do a way to accelerate the aging. There's nothing like accelerating the aging. When people tell you there's no way, it's like using cream that makes, look how wrinkled I am and stuff. I tried for a couple of years because I've been beaten by the sun being outside. It doesn't work. And so it's the same thing, and it's okay. And it's okay. But, or maybe it does, but I found the wrong one, and it's okay. But it's like accelerating aging. No, but if you some people put staves or wood chips, so it extracts more wood, the additional wood can be part of aging, but that's not the whole picture. The whole picture cannot be reproduced. But they were probably working in one of these little levels, trying to get rid of the most aggressive stuff and then coming along to something that created a specific style.
Yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought of that because I guess if you're, trying to develop, for example, just to go back to, Cut and Dry, I think you would have a pretty good idea in your head of like, this is what I want our coconut rum to taste like, versus something like this. You're kind of, you're setting out without really, you're setting sail, if you will, without really knowing when you're going to hit land. You're trying out a new technique and you're like, I have no idea what this is going to produce on the other end, but we're here, so let's try it.
Well, Greg, that's why we called it sail number one, because to us was a knowledge journey, but a tasteful journey where you had to be. I'm a bit of a control freak, as a blender. I was like, we're going to do this. It's going to be the best, and we're not going to stop until we get there. Here, you have to do a little bit of yoga, and to say like, look, we're going to learn about these techniques, and we're not going to force it. We're just going to learn from it, and we've learned incredible things from it, so that's the adventure that we share. So you guys like it?
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. And, I wanted to say this, the idea of being a cognac master blender and then making these rums it just makes so much sense to me. It's just like, because I got into this industry because of cocktails, right? And as far as the history of cocktails go, or just mixed drinks in general, it all started with rum and brandy. They all started, punches started with rum and brandy, and, even moving forward through time, it's, the evolution and the canon of classic cocktails was all rum and brandy, and then mostly brandy, really. And so, like, being at the forefront of that, being like the oldest spirits, really, like kind of like Western spirits, I guess. It just makes a lot of sense to me. It's really cool that you've tapped into this, which is, yeah, like you said, you've written this book about Navy Rum, which is such a small percentage of what the other spirits are in the world, but it's fascinating enough to where someone you guys did the research on it. It's really cool. I think, like, and what Sother said too, we think of like these, like what we call winter spices, baking spices. It's like, Sother, you're like a big eggnog guy. I'm just seeing Fogg and Nog, and I'm like,
yeah,
dude, Fogg Nog,
Some
man,
aged,
you guys are good. The Fogg and Nog.
Some aged Mister Nog coming up.
Yeah. Fogg Nog with a Yule log. I think it's got a good ring to
there
it.
you go.
I think I'll take the remainder of my bottle here and get some started, and we'll age it till Christmas and see how we do.
Well, I'm actually at the end of mine. I've got just enough left to do one last cheers here at the end of the show. But wow, this has been so fascinating, Alexandre. like
Yeah,
you're obviously a wealth of knowledge, and you're funny while doing it. So this has been great, guys. Well, it's a really fun way for me to spend a morning in California, drinking overproof rum on the rocks. I've got my tea on the side. But yeah, this is really cool.
You're halfway to punch.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the tea actually has a bunch of those spices in it, so I mean, all I need is some citrus now, and then we're good. But yeah, so where can people learn more about Planteray and this Mister Fogg rum?
On Mr. Fogg, there's the book, and so we only thought there'd be a few people, and guys like that'd be like, hey, I want to read this, but actually there's a lot of people who wanted to know more about rum. So we printed just a couple of thousand. So we're out of print, we're reprinting, and of course we're going to tweak a few things, and so it's going to be out there. And Matt has a publishing edition that they do. Matt Pietrek, if you check what he does. And also I suggest, also to everybody who loves rum, he's got also the Rum Wonk and Cocktail Wonk. But it's funny, by the way, Damon, not to digress, but what you say to me, the fact that you know bartending so well, and I always feel that for us distillers, we build the instruments of bartenders, or people who are at home having a great drink. And I like to say I make the instruments, and you guys play the music, and because the minute my grandmother never went to bed on a harsh day without having a cognac or brandy, at a higher proof with a big ice cube, and she used the wrong glass, the big snifter looked fancy on the farm, it's a tough day, and what she did by diluting down the brandy with progressively, she actually created without knowing flavors, because your body perceives the molecules that it's from differently depending on the concentration. So I want to say to the listeners, if you're doing this, you're actually not crazy, and you're actually accessing different flavors. So a rum like this, the way you guys did it, you put a big ice cube, and as you sip, because your body is going to perceive it, you're going to have like you're flipping through the pages of a book of flavors. And a bartender is doing this willingly or unwillingly, unknowingly or unknowingly, and that's what we're trying to do with Planteray. It's just provide these tools for pleasure, whether it is if you're somebody who loves hedonist, or you're a bartender, and so I'm trying to create these rums that are very, very, very specific, to that effect. So to learn more, we have a website, Planteray Rum, and so that people can check out. Thank you. We're in a so we feel humbled that we're in all the great stores, and I never thought about this, when I started, we're just 6 guys on the mission, now we grew, and so that's something that we love to share, to share that journey. My job is to make sure that I'm gonna surprise your taste buds, and I got a few other ideas to come where you're gonna go, man, I never been there before, and I'm doing this to myself too, and I've been at it for the 35 years.
Well, that's awesome, man. And we'll definitely put a link in the show notes there so people can tune in to see what's going to be surprising their taste buds next. But for now, that's going to do it for us this week on the Speakeasy. If you want to hear more from us here at Speakeasy HQ, you can sign up and become a regular on our Patreon page. Our regulars get access to all kinds of good stuff. You get sponsor-free listening. You get video podcasts. You get cocktail recipes from all of our guests. You get bonus episodes. And you get a free cocktail kit each month from our good friends at Shaker and Spoon.
That's right.
And speaking of good people that we're friends with, HRN has got its first ever listener survey running right now. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. And upon completion of the survey, you will officially be in the running to win a $250 gift card to Goldbelly. Plus, once you complete the survey, you will automatically win a place in our hearts, because these things really do help us here at the radio station, and genuinely, we truly appreciate it. Speaking of which, Sother, you've got something else that you're building on right now that you want to talk about, right?
Yeah, if you're in the New York City area, I would love to see you at Amore Amargo on Sunday night. My good friend Lucky Prexto and his company January Spirits is doing the second release of their Genepi, the 23 release. The Genepi won Best in Category Liqueurs. Tough category to win Best in, I think. At New Orleans Spirits Competition. It's delicious stuff. Please come down to Amore Amargo this Sunday evening. We're going to have a great time and pour lots of Genepi. And, they made their bones this summer calling Genepi and soda the drink of summer. But January Spirits is year round. So we're going to keep
awesome.
going.
And it's about to be the drink of winter too. I'm calling it right now. I'll be there to support. I'm looking forward to it. But as always, be sure to check out heritageradionetwork.org for many great programs just like this one. And be sure to tune in next week when our guest is Joseph Solis of Maison Solis. And I think this is actually going to be a first here at the Speakeasy because he recently developed a new line of agave-based fragrances. And Damon, I know you're kind of a fragrance guy, and I'm an agave guy, and I also like smelling nice. So I'm excited to have him on and talk to him about that. But for now,
the cool thing is actually, Greg, that when just for our listeners, that was a joke because fragrances. Yeah, I'm into fragrances. They're usually in my glass. And then they're on kind of certain parts of my face. And sometimes they end up on my shirt. So these agave-based fragrances are actually a Blanco, Reposado, and Añejo fragrance. So, not if you're around me much, you're not going to notice too much of a difference, I guess. But, but yeah.
It's good, too. It's just like, no, I wasn't drinking. No, this is a fragrance. And it's actually, they're interesting. We'll get into it next week. But,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But for now, that's going to do it for us. So until next time, cheers, everybody.
Cheers, everybody.
Cheers.
So you don't shun the devil with your right.
The Speakeasy is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food and drink radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.
Hey listeners, thank you so much for listening to HRN. We want to make your experience as a listener even better, and to help us do that, we'd love your input on our audience survey. It'll only take a few minutes, and by completing it, you can enter to win a $250 gift card from Goldbelly. Visit heritageradionetwork.org/survey to take the survey and to help us keep growing and improving. That's heritageradionetwork.org/survey. Thanks for your support.